useless eaters. And I say, remember, to them, anybody other than them are useless eaters.
So they've got their bunkers, they've got their hidden homes, and they're ready.
Yep. And fascinating that, just to let you know, I talked to a builder. Montana has some of the, we have a lot of incredibly condensed areas where a lot of people are moving to. It's called the last best place, you know?
Right.
And I asked the guy, he doesn't tell me names, I don't ask names, but he said, Steve, you'd be amazed of how many places, this man only builds houses that are in the $5 to $10 million range. He said, I said to him, I said, how many of those houses are you putting in bunkers, you know? He said, all of them. Now, that's fascinating, George.
All of them.
All of them. And, you know, I mean, this is like who's who in the world lives at some areas of Montana.
What's happening with Hugo Chavez? He's pretty quiet lately.
Well, actually, he's making a lot of noise in the acquiring Russian weaponry is by the tunes of the billions. And remember, he's now made this statement. I'm glad you brought that up. One of the most critical areas in the world for our well-being when it comes to oil is the Caribbean. Most people don't realize the Dutch Antilles Islands, Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao, especially Aruba, is very critical to the offloading of the super ships because they're deep water ports. And we've been picking up a lot of information of the Dutch and NATO. And if you know and have been watching, again now, the U.S. military is putting a Navy contingency in the Caribbean. Well, we're encountering a lot of Russians in the Caribbean, and one of the concerns is, and I was told this by a former Venezuelan oil minister, that when things get hot and everything goes to war, that the oil facilities in Aruba come into grip. And by the way, this is something very few people knew about until we start talking about this stuff, okay? And when I sat down with this gentleman who speaks better English than I speak Spanish, I speak no Spanish, very little. The point is, he said, you must tell your listeners, Steve, that this is the choke point, the entire North American continent.
And in the Navy, you have to have choke points to win.
Yep. And so the thing is that Chavez is basically shifting a lot of his oil to China. And it's kind of like, how do I say this? It's kind of like the quintessential weapons bazaar where Chavez has got a lot of money, okay? And obviously he's mad, and rightly so. If someone was going to try and kill you and you're being told through the intelligence, and let me share this about intelligence. Where it once was the realm of governments almost exclusively, most of the American intelligence capabilities now are being hawked out, if you will, or sold out to private contractors. And it's like the Alice's restaurant. You can get anything you want if you'll pay for it. Intelligence is a commodity now. If I wanted to find out who's where in the world with what manpower, what equipment's there, you know, I can basically buy that information. Anybody can.
And you know, the Hormuz Strait up there in the Persian Gulf is a checkpoint, too.
Absolutely. And what have the Iranians said they're going to do? They're going to cut it off. So I present a picture of, you know, it doesn't take, these are not my projections. These are the guys that know, but they're talking war with Iran. And if we get into it with South America, and quite candidly, we have so many military assets being moved into that part of the world that we are going to go to war in that part of the world. Can you imagine $400 to $500 per barrel oil?
Don't even go there.
Yeah, and see, that's the thing. We're vulnerable, and I got to tell you, I'm almost wondering if there has to be a contingency in the U.S. government, not I'm wondering, I know, that absolutely is in cahoots, that is absolutely controlled by the globalists, because you couldn't have a more prominent death wish than we seem to be expressing to the world.
Stephen, give me your view, your vision of this planet 10 years from today.
Well, let's go to 2012, okay, because that seems to be the buzz.
That's only 4 years away.
That's only 4 years away. According to the Bible, and I'm just saying, going by the book, it's laying out just exactly. We're going to have 42 months from this war, and, you know, people will argue. Some people believe it's 7 years, quote the tribulation. There are 10 passages in Scripture, Daniel especially, where it's talking about 42 months, where all hell on earth, where everything that has been evil in history will be focused in that 3.5 year, 42-month period. and the blood is going to flow. So these people that literally want to depopulate the world, they'll use war, they use pestilence, they'll use famine. And George, 5 years ago, famine wasn't even on the radar screen, okay? But now we've got a situation where man's darkest hour is approaching quickly. And the thing is that, again, I quote, because there's no better statement than what Jesus made, except the days be short, there be no flesh left alive. When you've transgenically mutated specific viruses, when you've combined the worst of the worst and basically put it on steroids, and this is what a lot of the defectors and a lot of the bioweapon scientist defectors have said, it wasn't enough to have Ebola or smallpox, you had to combine them to have Ebola pox. When you take the Spanish flu, and basically it isn't enough to kill 50 million people, you want it to be a super energized form that kills 500 million people. When that stuff is ultimately turned loose, it becomes very threatening.
So what are you going to do?
What am I going to do?
You going to head for the hills or what?
Well, I pretty much live in the hills,
That's true. You're in Montana, right?
Yeah, I'm in Montana. It's why you don't get me to L.A. very often.
No, we don't.
Yeah. And the thing is, what I'm trying to do, George, is basically tell people that there is hope. And I'm telling them this. I'm serious. Number one thing people have got to do, they really need to look at a roadmap of the future. People go to great extremes and great expense to try and get a handle on the future, okay? Obviously, one of the things that I've done is to say that from my starting point, I see history not in a linear form, but almost in a spherical form. If you look at the surface of a basketball and see the writing and all the stitching on the basketball, imagine those are all events. And if you try and just look at one stitch or one thread, you're going to miss the big picture. And the big picture is it doesn't get lovey and hunky-dory. And see, you and I have talked about that. Look at all the war. It's like Barry McGuire's song, The Eve of Destruction. Now it's like minutes in play. See, I don't believe we're leading up to it. I believe it's all in play. It's stated that Vladimir Putin spoke to George Bush at the Olympics, and this was on some of the foreign news services, and made the statement, the war is on. He wasn't talking about Georgia and Ossetia. He wasn't talking in that context. He was talking the war. And the war is basically WW3. All of the rhetoric coming out of Moscow, all the rhetoric, and when I say rhetoric, the determined statements, it doesn't matter if it's a Russian high command, it's all war, war, war. It appears that by the prepositioning military assets throughout the world, that we expect that we're going to go to war with Iran. But what people don't understand is Russia is now stating that they're going to sell Iran the S-300 counter-missile system, and that means that will force the Israelis to go, or the U.S., whoever's going to go, to do what they're going to do ahead of time.
And let me ask you this. Let's assume we stay out of it.
Yep.
And the Israelis go in and take out the nuke plant.
Yep.
What do the Russians do? What's their next chess move?
Right.
What will they do?
Well, I think the Russians will basically stand us down.
Well, but I mean, what do they do to the Israelis?
I'm sorry, George, I missed the question, I think.
If the Israelis attack Iran,
right,
what do the Russians do to the Israelis, if anything?
Well, the Russians have said they will come to the aid of Iran, and that's when you get Gog and Magog coming into the Middle East. And see, that's what people don't understand. First of all, too, the thing that I think is important for people to recognize, and I want to clarify something. What I said is that the New World Order is looking at China, making it the largest economy in the world. They're not there yet, but they are looking at the 1.2 billion consumer market. That was made by, good night. You've got some of the most famous investment advisors saying China is going to be the hottest place on the planet. So I'm not saying that it is now. I'm saying it's going to be according to the New World Order. They want to make